And God said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." If you want to be able to see, please feel free to move around. It's been a momentous week for Scotland, and at this point, as we keep hearing, it's time to let strong differences be and to find a way to move forward and pull together for the good of our nation. All of us who live and work here, people of different backgrounds, different faiths and nationalities, all of us who make up what Scotland is, we all belong to this land and we want its good. The land holds us together, and we are invited to recognise our land as sacred, holy ground. We heard Emma and Flora read to us the story of Moses and the burning bush. Moses saw the bush lit up and burning, and in curiosity went over to see why. It was then that God told him to take off his shoes before the mystery. Last summer in New Mexico, I was involved in leading an interfaith week with a Jewish rabbi and a Sufi Muslim teacher. Rabbi Newell was leading us in a Torah study on this particular text. Newell said, "You know, every bush is burning. Every bush is on fire with the presence of God. The really significant thing is that Moses noticed that it was burning." How do we apply that to Scotland? How do we see, recognise and notice the presence of God amongst us? How do we see the Scottish ground we share as sacred and celebrate our diversity while seeking unity? This was one of the discoveries of our time walking the Camino in Spain as a multi-faith peace pilgrimage. Perhaps it can be a wee parable. It's an ancient pilgrimage route, and we were very aware of the ground under our feet. The ground was the context for holding our time together of exploring and sharing our differences. We were a group of 12, 6 faiths and 7 nationalities. And as we began, we brought our intentions to listen deeply to one another, to seek oneness and diversity, to let go to God and to trust the experience together. Walking is a great place for easy conversations and laughter. The mundane things build community amongst us. Sharing a blister bandage or a beautiful sky, singing as we walked along, or spotting the Camino shell that signposted that we were on the right path. For an hour each morning and each afternoon, we listened to each other. We stopped and formed a circle in a wood, by a well, on a cliff top, to learn about one another's traditions and to hear one another's stories. We also joined in one another's spiritual practices. We chanted Om, shared Shabbat on Friday, practiced yoga and Tai Chi and meditation in the early morning, meditated, and joined in Salat. Many were spiritual practices that involved the body. In Salat, the Muslim prayer, when you bow and your head touches the ground and you smell the goodness of the earth, you can feel the sense of surrender to God. And Islam means to surrender. When we stretched outside during morning yoga, we could feel we were wakening up to the goodness of the day, to the goodness of life and the goodness of the Creator. When the candle was lit and the bread was shared round the table at Shabbat, we could feel the unity. As we sang one another's songs, one day something astonishing happened. Saul, who is Jewish, was teaching us the Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia that we sang earlier here. And suddenly Pius and Adam, who are both here today, came up and said, "We know that song, only we sing it in Arabic. Allahu, Allahu, Allahu." It felt at that moment that music could powerfully reach across differences and connect us unexpectedly. And just as music can find common ground, so can art. And I'd like to mention the exhibition of Dave Fraser, which is over here behind me. And for those of you who haven't seen it, to go in, because as you go into the 20,000 beats, the space, the beautiful space, evokes a connection to the many different faiths which use beats in their spiritual practice. So please go in. As we walked on the Camino, the land spoke to us. The awe-inspiring beauty of parts of the walk made us fall in love with the natural world, while walking through the industrial parts raised issues of how we could better care for the earth, for the land and the planet. And that makes me think of the Climate Change March, which is happening in a few hours just down the road from here. I know several students who are not here today because they have chosen to be on the march. It's an important issue to keep in mind when we speak of sacred ground. It was the lunches that became for me a symbol of the way hearts could open to one another. We started with individuals bringing their bread and cheese to have with their lunch. But by the end of the week, it was a shared feast, with each pilgrim in our group offering something to the common table. Local fresh cheeses, fish, olives, fruit, special chocolate. And other pilgrims, as they passed, were welcome to stop and to share. Halfway through the week, at Paula's albergue, her hostel, the discussion reached a new depth. It was over difference and how we made room for one another without excluding one another. There was real honesty, tears shed, but still a sense of caring and compassion. One pilgrim put it this way: "I had never had the experience to be part of such an honest, challenging, and yet respectful conversation. I find it so easy to get defensive or offensive, but people really listened. It was an honour to be heard and hear others speak." This helped us trust that God's presence is always there, burning with light and love in the midst of real difference and conflict. I have one last story about sacred ground, conflict and trust. A group of us studying sustainability and spirituality at the chaplaincy went to a community garden in one of the poorest areas in Glasgow. We heard the story of how it had begun. It was prompted by the lack of fresh vegetables in the area. There were only 2 poorly resourced shops, filled mainly with tinned goods, for a population of thousands, and the bigger supermarkets were miles away, out of reach. Seed money was given to begin the garden, and they began to grow their own vegetables. However, some of the youth in the area, they didn't understand what the community garden was about. And as several months in, they came and vandalised the property and burned down the house. The garden team kept going, and several weeks later, 2 young men came from the housing estate and asked if the ashes of 2 of their friends who had been killed in Afghanistan could be buried there. The garden team agreed, and they began a memorial garden. More and more from the housing estate brought ashes of loved ones and came to remember them. It became a sacred site. And as they respected that site, so the garden too became respected. There was no more vandalism. Volunteers joined the gardening team, helping produce fresh vegetables for the area. Conflict gave way to fruitfulness. Understanding and trust found common ground. As we reflect on our world and its conflicts, religious and political, including Scotland, especially at this time, may we find places where we can demonstrate the bonds of relationship and trust that come from staying in connection with one another while recognizing difference. May we keep looking for the light and love and presence of God. May we keep recognizing the sacred ground that we share together and take off our shoes.